We're going to go ahead and kick it off because we stay on time here around Zen. Welcome, Elle. This is you've found yourself to Interop Workshop, and this is a technical discussion that Zen does with the courtesy of Zen with regard to healthcare data interoperability, and we guarantee that it is the most fun that you can have and still be talking about healthcare data interoperability. I have fun saying that every time, but it's true. We do have a lot of fun doing this. I am the host of this. Actually, Zen Healthcare IT is the host. I'm kind of the MC. My name is Jim Benson. I'm the CEO of Zen Healthcare IT, and with us here today, as always, the man who loves to be abused is Ron Wilson. He's the VP of Engineering and Product Development around Zen, and is the culprit for a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today. In addition, we've asked Derek Whalen to join us as well. Derek is the VP of IT and security around here, and is our security officer and a HITRUST guru as well, because we are HITRUST R2 CSF certified. And it's a big deal. And some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today certainly pertains to that. As I've said many times, this is the 8th episode that we've put together. This is an open mic forum, I should say. We encourage people to turn your cameras on and turn your microphone on, and let's have a discussion. The last thing any of us need is a boring presentation with no interaction. We just as soon interact with the issues that real people have. And so we invite you to do that. We were off for Labor Day last weekend, so we skipped a week. It's a little odd for us. Normally, this is a weekly thing. And we even talked about not long ago that, wow, should we be having these this often? And then we started talking about the topics that we have to discuss in healthcare interoperability. And we'll probably be doing it weekly for a while because there's a lot to cover. Last week, actually 2 weeks ago, the Interop Workshop, we covered the national network's purpose of use and exchange purpose. I have down here, really the purpose of use, and understanding the on behalf of, or OBO, type of participant in those networks. Those two topics we covered in a lot of detail. There was a lot of good feedback that we got with regard to them, but no other follow-up that we have with regard to those. But we invite your questions and comments with regard to them, and we did revisit those ideas. And because they're going to continue to change going forward and have new nuances, we'll be revisiting those topics in sessions to come. Today's topic this is a little different for us. We're going to be focusing on one topic today rather than fitting two topics in, because as we started putting the details together for it, we recognized that there's a lot of meat and potatoes here, if you say it that way. So this topic is DIY, or do-it-yourself interoperability, and how great that is, and it really is great until it's not, and what to look out for. So that's the topic that we're going to be discussing here today with these experts who have done an awful lot of integrations themselves. And we'll get some good perspective on that. And I think the truth is that there are really great tools out there, a lot of them open source, that allow people to get in and do some of these things. And that is a really great thing. We certainly don't want to indicate that, no, you should never do any of this stuff yourself. No, actually, there's a lot of good reason to do things yourself when you can. So we'll talk about some of those things, but there's some really important things to consider before you get into it, rather than just blindly pick up the open source tools and do it and then find yourself behind the 8-ball a little bit. So we'll talk more about those. Just setting the stage and perspective. Zen is many years old now. We're right at 9 years old. So we've been doing interoperability for a long time, and most all of the team has been doing it for considerably longer than that. We've built the solutions that we've put together here, Gravity and Gemini and Stargate, using open source tools. Those tools that are available to most folks out there. Postgres is a great example of it. And certainly Mirth Connect, the most widely used interoperability engine out there. Lots of people have used it. I have no idea how many downloads they have. I'm not sure they know how many downloads they have, but it is a big number. There's a lot of Mirth Connect out there, and it is respected as a really great tool. But there are drawbacks to it as well. So we use those internally. We've done different things to them. Some of the tools that we've used, we've forked. Some of them we use out of the box, just like anybody else would. But we've done a lot of different things with a lot of things that make them different and make them work together. So I just wanted to set the tone with that. Those are the kind of tools that, as we reference and go through these things, they're the tools that we use. So we'll be referencing Mirth Connect predominantly, but there are lots of different engines out there. And if you're using a different one, obviously change the thinking to whatever it is that you use. As I mentioned, DIY, it can be very highly effective for you yourself, and you should be able to avail yourself of those things. When it provides for a data flow that streamlines and makes things much better for you, it replaces obsolete processes and makes your organization better. That's great. Mirth Connect is a transformation tool. And allows you to standardize data in many different ways. Again, I'm going to shut up in a second and let Ron comment on these things because he has more details on them than I have. But those are both great characteristics to it. DIY also is really good when we're talking about scale is not being a huge factor to it. There are a bunch of nuances with regard to scale that we'll talk about in a couple of moments. And I would say in many cases, DIY is a reasonable thing when you control both of the endpoints. Remember that when we're talking about data interoperability, think about it in terms of basic Dixie cup and string is what I always go to, because that's what it is. And when you control both ends, both Dixie cups in that case, and have a Mirth Connect between them, in many cases, you're handling both sides of that transaction. You're using the tool, and that's a great thing. So security, some of those characteristics, you control both ends of it. DIY yourself, sure, it is a great option. But it is something that you need to consider very carefully. Do you really control both of those Dixie cups, if you will? And of course, when things are internal to you, to your organization overall, gives you a big leg up in being able to do a DIY. And a DIY doesn't work in all cases there, but that's another case where it is potentially really good. Now, there are numerous use cases that we have out here for that we're doing that Zen sees all the time. There are those internal ones, like we're talking about. You're connecting something that you control to something else that you control, and then of course there's the normal use case, which is much more we're connecting to somebody else out there in the marketplace overall. Again, there's a couple of things I want to cover here, setting the tone. Just for people's reference, there are some 500 EMRs that are out there in the marketplace, and that's EMRs that just make just one sector of the many things that you would connect to. If you have use cases where, let's say that you've got an application and you're going to connect to others, you may connect to 10 or 15 or 30. That would be a large number of those things. You start getting into scale, and Ron's going to touch on those things there pretty quickly. So there, and Ron, make a note there. I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about APIs and versus HL7 and what have you. So Let me give you just a little background on the outline of the topics here, and then I'm going to shut up because I know you're tired of hearing of me. The things that we've categorized these, and when we go through them, there'll be a number of them that you'll go, well, duh, because you've done it before, or it's part of your organization today. Some of them will start out being duh, and then you'll go, well, yeah, well, wait a minute, I didn't think about it at scale and at an enterprise level and some of those other characteristics. So bear with us if you find some duh moments in there. You'll find some that we go beyond that. But the major categories that we decided to focus in on here are criticality, security, maintenance, scale and complexity, compliance, disaster recovery, and the management and costs and unexpected costs thereof. So we'll take each one of those individually there. And we're going to start with criticality and how critical the connection is to your business. But before we get into those, Ron, did I miss anything? Do you got any other color commentary that we should be that pertains to what we've covered so far?
No, I don't think so. I think we're on the right track here with really the distinction between DIY and somebody looking for an enterprise solution. You know, one of the first things I ever did with Mirth Connect from a use case perspective, some 17 years ago, um, was push a data file internally from one server to another from a database on an automated interval.
Yeah.
So, no external exposure, no worry of any kind of attack vector outside of the physical network inside the environment, making a database connection, grabbing some data, formatting it up, and pushing it over to another server that was within the environment. Great DIY use case. It was very simple, straightforward. We had total control of it. So I think the use cases in that criticality component that you're top starting with first becomes kind of the primary evaluation of whether you should DIY, right? In that particular example, I was working for a small behavioral health EMR company, and they were using a cron job, and they had no way to monitor that cron job. And that cron job wouldn't run, so it wouldn't happen for whatever reason. And then it would get missed, and the event model wasn't timely, those kinds of things.
Right.
And I had bought a Pico from Mirth, right?
Sure.
And stuck that Pico in a closet and put this together. And we had I used the alerts in Mirth Connect to send an email out that it had completed the file. Pretty basic stuff, but everyone got the email and the event was successful or it didn't succeed, right? So criticality starts to get into, now this has to run. That particular problem case, it wasn't the end of the world if it didn't run. You start talking about lab orders and results and referrals and referral responses and real-time data ingress and egress, trying to sync systems. That Pico, somebody could have unplugged it.
Right.
Then what? Right? Then what? It's over. It's off. It's not running. So those kinds of things, and that Pico did get unplugged in the closet a couple times, frankly. A Pico was a little what are they like I don't want to call it a Raspberry Pi in today's reference, but it was this little bitty black box that Mirth Connect made that ran a skinny down version of Linux CentOS, and it had Mirth Connect on it, and it had Postgres on it, and it was all self-contained. You plugged it in, put it in Ethernet connection into it, SSH into it, you run the app, do your thing,
Well, you're going. Yeah.
And they were inexpensive, and it was all one package, right? We didn't have to create VMs, we didn't have to do anything. So I don't think those exist anymore today, but it was trick little device. And so, the criticality really gets into an interesting discussion because if you're, and we've been doing this stuff for decades, right? Going from office to office, right? ISDN lines from office A in Midtown to office B on the west side. And you're moving data. It's not a huge concept that's net new, but it starts to get more complex when you're interconnecting with external entities and different types of connections and all of that. So
Well, and as we get into that, one of the things that really occurred to me as more of a business guy here is the upstream and downstream impacts of the critical nature of it. And I find that a lot of folks will go, okay, if it goes offline, I'm going to find out because I check it every day, or I've got some notice, or what have you. And I'll retain the messages, and if I need to, I'll restart it and replay those messages. Okay, well, that's fine from your engineering standpoint. You've put yourself in a position where you're not going to lose data. But what are the impacts to the rest of the organization, or the organization that you're connecting to? How much do they depend on that thing being there? And when it is offline, do they know it offline, and do they have another way around it? You can really underestimate the impacts that are there to another organization or another department in your organization that, wow, okay, what do you mean this thing's offline? What do you mean we didn't get it, the stuff that we needed to last night? There can be a lot of impacts there, even to the point, because we are dealing with PHI here, and for the most part, doctors are using it. I even put in my notes here, our lives at stake. And I put in a parenthetical, seriously, they really can. Now, they're not in all cases, but they certainly can be. Additionally, when we're talking about X12 transactions and 835, 837s and getting paid, well, you go, oh, well, they didn't get their claims put in, but they'll put them in tomorrow. All you have to do is talk with folks that just went through Change Healthcare's stuff at the beginning of this year, and they'll tell you how important it is that they get their claims submitted and paid on time. And of course, adjudicated. So don't think that these, when you're looking at the DIY, this downstream impact from the decisions that you're making is real, and it can be extraordinarily costly. Another characteristic there is, what is your uptime percentage? If you don't have an uptime target that you've said, and in most cases, 3 nines minimum. If you're not targeting 3 nines, do the math and figure out how much downtime you have every month available to you. It's not much, and that's if you're not hitting the goals that you've got there, you should be really looking at that. It is a big deal. One other side note I made on this, because Derek, and you'll correct me if I say the wrong things here, but we noticed that a client's instance that we had been up and running for like 340 days or something.
a client's instance, not ours. I want to clarify that. I didn't hear. I thought I heard an
Yes.
appliance instance. It's a client.
Yes, they would not go over well with this team if we had this instance. But their own instance had been up for a long time, so it isn't that good. And the whole team was going, oh, wait a minute, that means that you haven't patched or otherwise maintained this instance for that period of time either, which is a really bad thing. So again, this is just one of those pivotal things that you should be considering. Maintenance is a real thing. If you are not having that and being able to take that offline because it's critical to you, you probably have an instance that you're not maintaining very well. So
Yeah, and you would, speaking on that more, there are methods to ensure that your kernel level security patches can be deployed to virtual machines without having to restart, but you have to usually set that up I know Ubuntu, you have to actually pay for licensing for
Feature,
their
yeah, the
VMs.
feature.
And so you have to actually do your homework and make sure that the current VM that you're using supports that, and then that you're actually getting those security updates in some sort of auditing fashion.
I mean, to that end, though, we've also seen systems where we've, had clients struggling. We do a screen share. We're online with them, and they're running Mirth 3.4.
Ah,
Yeah.
What's the Postgres version? 9.3. Buddy, that's EOL like 2014. Well, it works. Well, I get if it's working, you don't fix it. You don't, don't, but man, you're really taking a chance there, That's a long time ago, 10 years ago.
well, as the backyard mechanics that I know, Ron, you and I both are, and even just something changing your oil. Okay, you don't have to do it this weekend, but you do have to do it.
Yeah.
uh,
Or it's going to get expensive, right?
or it's
It's
going to
going to
get
get real
really
expensive.
expensive, right?
Yeah.
So, you do have to plan, like Derek was just saying, and what we find so many times is, while DIY is great, it takes a lot of planning. And maybe one of the things that we should do is put together an outline of those things that people should consider. We're not against DIY. I mean, we're in the business of doing it. We want to help people that are, but we probably should put a checklist together that says, if you're not thinking about this stuff, you should. We'll work on that. All right. The next topic that we had here is security. And we got to remember that, okay, as Ron was just saying, the internal one, okay, it's all internal. There's nothing exposed to the outside for the most part. You got to make sure that your networking people have that all set up correctly. But let's presume that that's the case. Great. But that's a very small percentage of what we see being used
Right.
in the marketplace overall. It is connecting to a third party, and that Dixie cup on the other side over there. What is, how much control do you have over what they're doing, and how that setup is there, and how is that being maintained between you? It may be all great, peaches and cream, and you work great together with them, but that goes to then scale as well. How many of those do you have to deal with? It is a big factor there. So let's talk about VPNs. We've had some other discussion about VPNs and secure connectivity. When does the things like VPNs and the connection management start to overload your capacity? And Derek, what if a client has a team of two people that are doing their, a normal size organization, two people in there, what kind of capacity do they have for these kind of things? Touch on what your experience has been a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to use the previous example that Ron was using about a Mirth Connect that's running 3.4. A lot of these old VPNs are stood up and they establish complete trust with the other network, and then they're forgotten about and they're never checked up on again. And sometimes VPN encryption settings, they become obsolete, no longer secure because they get broken. So you have to apply the same security review with all your VPN connections, and that's overhead for every single one that you have to connect to. Also, you need to keep track of every networking team that is responsible for the other side of the VPN connection, in case something goes wrong. Tracking VPNs going up and down is also a little bit of a pain to do at a firewall level because they do go up and down automatically enough as it is. So there can be a lot of overhead associated to just setting up VPNs, and then the security aspect of just completely forgetting about it later on and not understanding that your network is attached to X amount of networks depending on the VPN count.
Yeah, I mean, our internal, let's say our internal device count is 50. Once you get that VPN, it's that plus their device count, plus the next one's device count, plus the, and I mean, Derek, we've talked about this over the years, these network engineers, they're generally the entry level guys, right? They're not the top of the pile in the organization. And they just look at it like, well, yeah, every system should have access to this. Right? And that's the last thing we should be doing. The
Yeah.
5 machines need access to this connection, not 500 on their internal network,
And
right?
you honestly don't know what they have on there, and their internal network can all of a sudden just get natted to a single IP. So
Right.
they could expose their entire network to you, and you have no idea of knowing about that.
Yeah.
It is an interesting conundrum, and it's something that people don't think about, because they're given the task to make a connection. So their goal is to make the connection, not to restrict it necessarily.
And where this really gets to be problematic is if you're like Derek said, you're trusting that network. So if that device is able to, if that external network has direct access to an instance that has access to your core database, right? You're now potentially exposing your core database, all of the PHI in your ecosystem, to that external network, right? And that's one thing that when I started to develop the concept of Gemini, I abstracted that external access, right, to another device. And that device doesn't have access to that data. That device has only access to another device in our ecosystem, and that device has access. So you got to breach host, external network, VPN, edge device, and another internal device of ours to get to somebody else's back office. I mean, and those multi-tiered layers just change things. DIY, we've seen the craziest things in the DIY world, literally, especially when it comes to security stuff,
And
We're
that doesn't
connected.
happen organically.
No,
That ends up that has to be planned in order to make it functional.
right. But we've seen some of the wackiest stuff on that. On the VPNs, Derek, how many in your guys' ecosystem on a day-to-day basis, how many different firewall technologies have you guys battled with creating VPNs, and what are some of the functional limitations with that firewall technology that you guys have had?
A lot of the time it's not only just firewall technology, it's conflicting network policies that can cause issues when establishing a new VPN connection. For example, we at Zen have the policy that you NAT your hosts in the VPN to an arbitrary public IP because we utilize the entire private range. Plenty of environments I've encountered don't have the functionality to do it, or they do, and they have a policy that prevents them to do it as well. So it's just that, and then you run into a situation where somebody's got to bend. And
And it's a conflict resolution problem, right?
yep.
They're using on their side 172 something, blah, 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 and we're using it on our side. And when we create that VPN, that's a bridge, and that's not good, right?
Yeah, and just with the automated network days now, it's
Yeah.
just easier to say you don't get any of my private IP addresses. We'll just use arbitrary for VPN connections. And they're only valid to that VPN connection, especially if you set up an internal natting route that makes it so it wouldn't impact any of your systems trying to reach a real public IP, for example.
How often do you get pushback on that particular concept of abstraction or implementation from VPN folks on the other side?
Recently, not so much. I will have to
Okay.
admit, but there was a period of time there where it seemed like it was every single one didn't either understand the point
Right.
or the other reasons that I brought up.
Yeah.
It's another factor that goes into the DIY planning if you're going to do it, in that You may be putting it in place today. But just like Derek was saying, there was a time not long ago, and I remember Derek really struggling with this, where we would have others, that other Dixie cup, their head would try to explode, going, "You can't do that. That's a valid IP address out in the real world." And the explanation would have to be, yes, it is a valid IP address, but not in this context. And okay, so if you're setting it up today, there's going to be something new and or different with another connection that you're going to have to make 6 months or 12 months from today. So the importance of you factoring in of the maintenance of these connections and the changes of this DIY stuff over time. You don't just put it in there and go, "Hey, it works, and I never have to touch it again." It's just like security patching. You get to deal with it. If you're going to do it yourself, you got to pick up all pieces of it. So it's an important characteristic there. And one of the things, actually, it's not necessarily on my agenda here, but if you're at scale to any real degree, the secrets that you have to maintain internally to maintain basically a zero trust set of networks starts to become pretty significant. And I've heard of I haven't seen it myself, but I've heard of people, putting secrets in channels and other characteristics there. Guys, touch on secret management here, and the things you should really be watching for and planning ahead for.
So, Zen, we have a MC inventory product, right? Where we help folks kind of in this DIY space, from a consultative perspective. We look at their environment holistically. We make analysis of the environment. We make recommendations. We've probably done this, I don't know, 30 or 40 times for organizations of various sizes. And we actually have a code sniffer to find secrets, to point that out. They shouldn't be it shouldn't be in the code. And there's all kinds of stuff in there. Bitbucket keys, Bitbucket, passwords, Git passwords, JWT secrets in code templates or in channels, all of it. And it's a basic understanding of the construct of Mirth Connect, as an example. Secrets go in the config map, right? They don't go in channels or code templates. It's just, and you reference them from the config map. It's crazy.
So all of those things need to be planned ahead of time. And if you've got a bunch of connections already out there and that isn't part of the plan, you probably should go, "Stop. This is an initiative that we need to go back and look at here right away." So we've talked about zero trust and VPNs with that regard. Obviously, two-factor authentication. And I know that we've gone to great lengths to manage and prohibit the ability of SSHing and RDPing into things. Guys, touch a little bit on the dangers of allowing some of those characteristics.
Yeah, sharing those to the public internet, those ports, even if you change the default port to something else, is probably the worst idea. You should never, ever, ever do that. It just grants somebody the ability to hammer your shell to log in to the administrate and become root. There's no point putting that in a public facing internet situation. So that means you need to set up some sort of secure way of enabling that SSH connection or RDP connection to that system outside of just exposing that port to the internet. So like an SSL VPN or a zero trust solution is that would be the better way of doing things now. And zero trust has its own level of complications and complexity with deploying, especially in a DIY environment.
Now I know
I've seen this DIY access credential problem so many times. We've had so many clients that would share the password for SSH with us to log into their AWS EC3 instance. And it is open to the public internet and no two-factor authentication, nothing, no VPN, no nothing, no whitelisting of IPs. And, you know, it's really interesting. The DIY problem statement for companies is really going to be a bigger problem if it's an engineering person that's doing it.
Right.
Right. I mean, you know, I've seen this so many times where they've got a strong engineer who's got some technical experience with operating systems and installs and things, and they just cut them loose and they let them go run down the hill in AWS. And I'm gonna make a self-signed SSL certificate, and I'm just gonna use SSH with a self-signed SSL certificate. How's that make you feel, Derek?
Yeah, no, thank you.
No, thank you. And it never rotates, it never changes. They're just happy-go-lucky. They can just punch it in and get in because they don't want to go type in another 27 characters or use a password manager.
Yep.
And so it's a huge problem for folks again. And it's why we were focusing on that VPN. The VPN is not just part of the integration process, it's part of the entirety
Yes.
of access to that instance. Right. It's both integration data and it's an engineer resource access to the data. Huge problem. Huge problem.
Yeah, huge problem. Now, remember, I said at the very beginning here that there are a number of these things that we'll talk about that if you're sitting here watching this now, you're going, well, duh. Yeah. If you just said duh to what we talked about, you have a good idea of what goes into that. But you would be amazed at the number of people that didn't say duh to what we just talked about. It happens. It's not a one-off. It happens all the time. We see it all the time.
Yeah.
So if you're doing your DIY planning and you're going to do it yourself, make sure that you have competent people that are thinking that stuff through ahead of time and building it, excuse me, with that in mind. Really.
These two access methods are one of they're two of the most dangerous access methods outside of database accesses because they're known fixed ports, and this is such a common problem. You know, hackers know that people don't close those ports down and those services are running by default. And in the person that built the machine or did the install doesn't know enough to go disable access to that. They may not even be using it.
Right.
It's just enabled. And hackers find it and then they spend days, weeks, hours, years pounding on it, right?
They don't find it until they do.
Yeah, well, you find it. Yeah, you find it when the data's on the internet, right? You know,
Not funny.
But that's when it gets found. And typically, if that pattern of management of that DIY, there's no monitoring on those ports, right? Like Derek and team know instantly somebody's hammering one of our inbound access points. Like we get alerted that fast, man. And we've got, you know, attack vector prevention, all that. Are you going to have that in your space of your DIY? Probably not.
Exactly. Very, very, very important characteristic of your DIY structure as you're putting it together. And again, what we're talking about here is that you have factored that into your thinking as you've gone into it. And most people haven't. They would go back and try to do remediation at this point, and that's even tougher. All right, let's move on to maintenance that we've got overall. We touched on it a little bit earlier, the importance of maintenance and being able to take systems offline without impacting your users, hopefully, depending on how critical it is to the business that you've got, and the security patching. That may be happening very untimely. It's funny when they discover a vulnerability and it actually affects one of your systems. They don't do that on a schedule. They do that on, that's always a surprise. And you have to be in a position to react to that in a very timely manner. There are many cases where we've found that, hey, there's a discovery of it, and that has to happen like in the morning, like now, like right now. And we don't let it go. You have to have the built into your DIY plan how to deal with those kind of things that are a surprise, as well as the recurring maintenance that just needs to be done on a regular scheduled basis. It is vital. The consideration of how you do those both of those situations, the timed ones or the untimely ones, I should say, and the scheduled ones. Other characteristics, guys, that are critical to maintenance. Any thoughts?
Honestly, reviewing your environment and making tuning adjustments as needed. So maintenance includes monitoring so that you can see all that kind of stuff and ensure that the changes that you are making to increase the efficiency, resiliency of your deployment are going in the right direction and not actually hurting you. A lot of the time, what we've seen previously with people's environments is that they'll start making changes either in the database or in Mirth Connect without really understanding what they're trying to do. So they go add more threads because more threads equals better. And without any of the monitoring behind it that is required to know when you need to do other types of maintenance, you'd be operating blind and making the wrong decisions. So
database size is a perfect example of that, right? How many times have we seen a channel that doesn't have pruning turned on, and you get, we had a client that had a channel that had channel data in the database that was like, it was like 10 terabytes in the channel, not the whole instance. They had never, ever pruned or purged the channel for like 4 years, doing millions of messages a week.
Well, it's still working, Ron. What's the big deal?
Yeah. Upgrade that database, migrate that to another server, see how that, how that's going to work. And it was a DIY enterprise. They thought they were enterprise DIY.
Yeah.
And they were having performance issues as an example. But one of the things that I think is really interesting on the security patching problem statement is somebody gets wind that there's a security patch issue or problem, and they are now fearful of their environment. And let's just say they're on Mirth 3.6, and the resolution is actually in Mirth 4.5. Can you go from 3.6 to 4.5? And how are you going to navigate those cliffs of versions and I don't know that there's been a significant breakage between those two, but there was a time in Mirth Connect's life cycle that there was a big breakage between versions, and there's nothing to prevent that from happening again. Right. So if you're not perpetually working on your upgrade cycle or paying attention to the cycle, you could end up with a huge problem on your hands because you've got to actually do the upgrade twice. Right. You may have to get to 312 and then jump over into the 4 series as an example, because you can't go from 3.6 to 4,
And that's not relegated to Mirth Connect. That can happen.
No.
Right.
It can happen in anything. Postgres, it could happen at the OS. You could have issues, right? All of that can happen.
So that takes us directly into the scale and complexity of what it is that you're planning. It is interesting as we talk with prospects for our solution. The number of times where we've started to dive into, well, what is the volume that we're dealing with? Ron, what would you say the percentage of people that really can give a solid estimate? It's an estimate, but a solid estimate of what their volume of transactions is.
15%.
Yeah.
Literally, it's probably 15%. And it's generally the big guys. It's generally the folks that are doing millions, tens of millions, 50 million a month transactions. And they get spun up because they can't give me within a million on their ADT count. I'm not upset if you're doing 13 million ADTs versus 12 million. I'm trying to understand the scope here. Are you a 50 million a month transactioner or are you a 5 million a month transactioner? Oh, we're doing 50 million plus. Okay, great. You go to other folks, how many of those messages we don't know. We'll have to get back to you. And they come back and they're doing 100,000. Okay, great. All right, or they're doing 50 million, they don't even know it. We've seen it both ways.
Yeah. And if you're doing a DIYing and you haven't already done it or have experience doing it, you're just starting out, you really almost in many cases don't have a benchmark of what to measure from. So it's seemingly a simple, straightforward question, but it rarely gets us a straightforward answer. It's a far more complex than what people realize, but it is important for you to figure out because all of the things that we've talked about and a handful that we're going to continue to talk about in this are dramatically affected by the answer to that question. So there's a lot hanging on it. Scalability and complexity, database tuning. We were just talking about it. And what you start out with when you get going to be early on is going to change sometimes very considerably when you go live and when 6 months hence down the road. So many will do their planning on what it is today or what it is going to be in 90 or 180 days. And then, hey, it's working. What's the big deal? And all the things that Ron and Derek here have talked about earlier kind of go by the wayside because it's working.
It's really interesting. We've been called in to help with some projects where it's homegrown or it's self-hosted. Strong team, they're not rookies, but Azure environment and in their VMs they just keep allocating more CPU and more memory. And they had, guys, we need to look at the resources on this server. I need to take a look at those. Can you get somebody on with me that can show me the dashboard and stuff? I want to see where we're at. Thing's got 32 CPU and 128 gig of memory, and the Mirth DB is 40 gigs or 50 gigs, something like that. And I'm like, something else is going on, Well, they only had like 10 connections to the Mirth DB, and they're running like 3,000 threads and wondering why it's running slow. And I'm like, well, guys, it's Mirth Connect is lipstick on a database application, and you are choking the daylights out of the access to the DB. Go give that 100 threads to the DB. Let's see what happens. And it's running 0.5% of CPU, and it's like, 10x faster.
Right.
I'm like, you guys need to reallocate all that CPU. This thing needs like 4 CPU and 16 gig of memory, and it needs like 400 threads to the database. You got to fix that. But they spent the money, right, over a period of time in their internal DIY management of it, adding CPU, adding memory when it was not the problem at all.
Exactly. So in order to do a DIY, we talked originally at the very beginning here of having, a minimum of 2 people. Okay, if somebody is going to go on PTO, you got to have the resources available to you, especially if any part of this interoperability is mission critical. We all know that. Okay, duh. But now here's another factor with regard to the personnel and expertise that you need access to. One characteristic is how to make, that Mirth Connect or whatever engine you're using do the transformations and interoperability that you need. But there's a whole nother skill set that is there. In addition to the security, now we're talking about database tuning. That's very, as a backyard mechanic, you don't need that. All you need is a tree and throw a rope over it. You pull the engine up. Well, that's not enterprise level. That's not something that you stake your business on. Now we're talking about things that, wow, okay, you have to be able to scale. You got to be able to do it.
The scaling thing is really another interesting problem statement with DIY. You know, where most of this starts is there's a machine sitting over the corner that they're not doing anything with, and they want to go do something with Mirth Connect, and so they get Johnny to go over there and put Mirth Connect, you know, put a fresh install of Linux on it, put Mirth Connect on it, put Postgres on it, connect it to the network, and let it run. So it's running on a bare metal device, right? It's this old computer that nobody's using that's sitting in the corner. Boss is happy, didn't spend any more money. Nope, great. Life's grand. Derek, how hard is it to update a bare metal machine like that compared to something like a container?
Uh, well, I stopped building my own desktops a while ago.
Yeah, right.
So, and that's for just my personal desktop. So I wouldn't even want to do that for a business one. I would let's use virtualization, please.
Yeah,
Containerization is the way to go for sure. And you can't do that easily if you're hosting your own hardware.
you can. And if you're using that leftover, you know,
Yeah, that
server,
leftover. Yeah.
you know, and you know, so from the scalability perspective, you're at the mercy of that hard drive dying in that bare metal box, right? And then you're done, right? Versus containerization or virtualization and, you know, automated deployments and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it really starts to get kind of kooky when you think about it, you know.
Now, and a lot of people are going, well, duh, that's why the networks are, you know, excuse me, the
Cloud.
is out there. And so nobody does that anymore. Well, you'd be surprised. Actually,
Oh,
there are there are a lot of them, but the cloud is not without overhead with regard to that as
look,
well.
an EC3 instance is basically a bare metal device, right? I mean, depending on how you build it, right? Most of them are treated just like a bare metal device. Now, you get better backup and restore capabilities and those kinds of things, but effectively it acts and it behaves like a bare metal device. And, you know, those are no better in the scheme of this. They're really
So
not.
you still have to plan. Okay, you're on AWS and you got an EC3 instance. You still have to plan for that.
Yeah, you know, if you're gonna, you know, hot upgrade that and something goes sideways, again, it's gone. It's not responding. So now you got to build a second one and you're going to manually build it. And then you've got to, you know, move the traffic between the two, right? Behind the AWS environment. So, you know, if you're a stronger, you know, DIYer, that works and makes sense. But how many of them are contemplating that hot replacement or that blue-green scenario in their EC3 deployments,
Right.
right?
Now, I'm going to do a little housekeeping here thing because we don't normally do this. We go through and we've timed these things out, but we knew that this was going to be a big subject here. We've got a handful more things to talk about in scale and complexity, but we still have compliance, disaster recovery, management and costs, and then you know, some real use cases here. Guys, do you feel that that's enough information that we should finish out in the 7 minutes that we've got left, finish out the topics that we've got and kind of pull it together and pick this up as a follow-up to it next week? Because I think there's a lot more still to cover.
I think there's a lot more to discuss here. I think we should do this as a part two, really, Jim. When you and I talked about this earlier in the week with those ideas that you started with, I mean, there's a lot of problems here in this DIY space, and there's a lot of risk for business owners and companies and people, right? When you really think about the criticality of it, right? Let's just say you're a small entity, you're a small practice, and you've got, you know, 8 people in your office, and you DIY this scenario to send your claims to Change Healthcare, let's just say, whatever. And this goes down, and you're not processing claims for 3 weeks. How you know, how's that practice going to manage payroll? I mean, that was the biggest problem in the Change Healthcare space. All of these small to mid-sized practitioners were starving. You know, they're living week to week, day to day claims processing to keep the cash flow in to make the light bill and pay payroll, right?
You probably can't design a better resume building activity for you to have is allow that to happen on your watch.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I think there's a lot to this, and there's a lot that folks don't really think of when they do it. They've got a trusted advisor. You and I talking about this other day. They've got a trusted advisor. The principal says, "Go do it, Johnny." Johnny does it. He's not. It's not his foray. Johnny's done a good job up to this point, but Johnny takes some shortcuts on this, or doesn't know the ropes, or doesn't understand the desperate risks that can be at play. And 2 years later, they are in a world of hurt because these kind of things we're talking about haven't been taken into account.
Well, and that's 100% accurate. And I can tell you firsthand for, running Zen for the 9 years that we've been doing it, as you put all these factors together, and let's say you did have the checklist that we'll put together, and you put a check in each one of these boxes. Now, when you add up the business costs associated with getting competent database, competent interoperability folks, the tools that we have or that you need in order to have proper backups, failovers, making sure that you don't have downtime. Unless you've got a very large scale organization, you're going to get the planned budget for that, and boss man is going to fall over. I guarantee it, because that is a big number. And they're going, what the hell are you talking about? All I want you to do is integrate this over here. People do it all the time. Why is your number so big? So you're damned
And
if you do, damned if you don't.
it's
Right.
really kind of, it boggles my mind sometimes to try to explain this to people. You can get 15 minutes of a guy that's been doing database work and moving data around for 35 years that fast. That's all that's needed is 15 minutes of Ron's time to go take a look at an instance and go, "Hey, Derek, I think we got to do X on that. Can you adjust that?" And then 15 minutes of Derek's time managing virtual environments and security, and go adjust that, and boom, it's fixed. It's doing what it should, right? And that 30 minutes of SME experience is invaluable compared to that budget you're talking about, Jim. I mean, good Lord.
Yeah. And again, we got 3 minutes left. We're going to stay on time because we always do. And I don't want anybody to go away from listening to this thinking that this is purely a sales thing for us. Of course, we want to sell our products, but we want people to understand what goes into them, and like any other company does. But there's a bigger characteristic to this. We see it all the time. The DIY, they're doing it. They're not understanding where their vulnerabilities are. They're not understanding why it costs so much to do it the way that they are. And they constantly get frustrated and are limited in success or completely unsuccessful in doing that. And that's certainly the case with trying to attach the national networks because all of this stuff is complex. The reality of it is that if you're going to take on the DIY, you need to make sure that you already have these things as part of your processes, or you have the way to build them, and the budget makes sense. And what we see all the time is that these things are just not considered. You get more open source Mirth, and you set it up and an AWS instance, and what's the big deal? Only to find out that you've got a big pile. And that's what we're trying to make sure that we're not saying, as I said at the very beginning, we're not saying in any regard, don't do it at all by yourself. There are many instances where it does make sense. Ron had a great one at the very beginning here. But you need to go into this eyes wide open.
Yes.
Or it will bite you. Talking, whether it's us or another trusted vendor that you have, on being able to get to Intelligent Life. You can get to Derek, you can get to Ron, and you can ask them questions. We even do free 15s to find out more about this, to see how to do that. And what we want to do, whether you're our client or not, is make sure that you're not mistakenly doing bad things that put you in jeopardy, because that doesn't help any one of us at all. So in that regard, it's a public service that we're doing. It's 59 minutes after the hour. You can't believe that you've actually sat through an hour of Interop workshop and talked about interoperability, but you have. We will set this up together to have the second version of this next week. We'll sprinkle a little bit more fun that's involved in it there, and we'll go from there. Thank you, everybody, for your time, and we'll look forward to talking to you next week.
Bye-bye.